Andy Oppenheimer. I'm a consultant in counter-terrorism. I lecture and I write and I communicate. I work as an analyst independently in defence and counter-terrorism, nuclear, biological, chemical weapons, that's my expertise, and explosives. I'm a singer and songwriter, starting in the early 80s with a band called Oppenheimer Analysis, which was on the invitation of Martin Lloyd to write songs and produce them together. We did a whole series of gigs and several songs on a particular release called New Mexico, on a cassette tape, as they were in those days. And this was during the 1980s electronic boom that took place in London, particularly in the early 80s. This music was being played in clubs like the Blitz Club and Studio 21, which is where we used to hang out. And it was great to actually be somehow part of that, even if not a famous part of that, to actually be on the edges, as it were, although I really did want to be famous, but then don't we all? Martin and I met in 1979 in Brighton, which is where I now live, at a science fiction convention in a big hotel on the seafront, and I was working for a magazine in those days, which was American, very kind of glossy science fiction and science combined. So we used to go to these conventions, i.e. to promote the magazine, and there was a whole lot of ceremonies for science fiction awards, and Martin was there. After a while he invited me to do some music with him because he had a studio in his home. He was kind of getting into that whole home studio movement, which I know very little about because I'm just a singer and a songwriter, and I leave all the technical things to everybody else. He was at the convention in his spare time, interest in science fiction, which was one of the things he was always interested in, apart from music, but the whole kind of, if you like, the culture of science fiction, the atomic age, it all got fed into the music that we were doing, which we started doing together in 1981 to 82. This was the Cold War, this was that time, and I had a particular image at that time, and with the name Oppenheimer we kind of put it together, but we actually produced some very danceable and commercial sounding songs. But the great influence for me was not really the electro scene, it was much more old-fashioned pop music. It just so happened that Martin was a synthesizer genius, and a producer of music, and that was the sort of burgeoning sound at the time on the dance floor, and it was very danceable music, and it just was wonderful to walk into a club and hear OMD and hear Fad Gadget and hear Human League, and later on when they became more popular, people like Soft Cell and the Pet Shop Boys. And this was a wonderful sound. It was a commercial sound as well. It wasn't underground for very long. It actually took off. It went into the charts, and that's what I would have loved to have done. I would have loved to have had some of our music actually get up there with all the other popular bands of the time. I was working for this magazine and listening really to music that I heard in a club. I've never collected music other than records when I was a kid and when I was a student, which would have been 60s, and then the sort of 70s music, which was a mixture of kind of soft and heavy rock. By the early 80s, I think it would be mainly Bowie, Roxy music were the main influences, which you'd hear, and particularly as the girlfriend I had at the time was crazy about Bowie. So we ended up going to these clubs because anybody that was a Bowie fan would end up going to one of these new romantic style clubs. And it so happened that the clubs, which would also be called futurist, with everybody dressed up in these amazing outfits from every period and every kind of fantasy you can imagine, and every kind of sexuality you can imagine. The experimentalism fed into the music, so not just people's appearance, but when you went into a club, you started hearing all this wonderful electronic sound. And that's how I heard it, whereas Martin would have heard it more as a great collector of music of every kind. I mean, he had this vast record collection and collection of tapes and everything else. So he followed music in a much more professional way, not just as a producer, but as an enthusiast, with a kind of technical analysis of the music as well as the history of the particular bands or whatever. So he knew everything that was going on in this new sound, you know, there's this electronic sound. Whereas me, I would just go into a club, I was more a performer and somebody that would just get ideas and write them down into lyrics from my own life and my own experiences, what I saw around me. We'd met at this convention, we became friends. Through this kind of science fiction circuit that I was on, which is basically where I met him. So I didn't meet him on a music circuit. I didn't meet him in a club or at a gig. It was because of my job that I actually met him. So it was the imagery. At the time I had bright orange hair and I was a Bowie clone. Now I was the man who fell to earth. So it's the slick back orange hair, the black suit, the very sparse, which actually went with the early 80s look, because when we went on stage, I would have I lost the red hair. I mean, you know, by the time Martin and I worked together, I had just short black hair back to my normal colour, and I had a whole different image by then, which was this kind of Cold War, the Oppenheimer, the scientist, a little bit a bit cerebral, actually. The time, the early 80s, the music was very intellectual. I mean, a lot of these songs that were being written by the electronic bands are fantastic. Can you imagine a song now getting into the charts called Enola Gay? The plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Martin was the collector of all time. You know, basically, you know, I think he had every science fiction novel that's ever been written. I think maybe his favourite's probably Philip K. Dick. I just remember him talking a lot about his work and Lovecraft, but probably lots and lots of others. We also went to a science fiction convention together in Boston. We met everybody. There was all the Thomas Dish and Arthur, Isaac Asimov, all those writers. I got to meet them all through my job. We made what in those days was a tape cassette called New Mexico of about 5, or I think another version had 7 songs, which were a mixture of dance tunes, and some of them were kind of a little bit more dreamy, a bit more reflective. Martin would produce these cassettes, and we'd take them to gigs and sell them, and we never actually got a record contract. Martin was not very keen on that. He didn't want to get involved with the rock business as it was at the time. My plan was to become extremely famous, but it wasn't Martin's plan, because he was working in a profession at the time which, you know, and I think he wanted basically to be less visible than me. He loved doing the production, and he loved being in the music crowd and to see what was going on. Martin was a great fan of other bands as well. I mean, he would want to follow, and certainly in our later period, you know, when we reformed, he would go and see other people perform, and he would do videos of them and all of that. And then I think he was very happy to just be playing in the background and then chatting to everybody afterwards, you know. So I think he was a great networker, whereas I love to perform chiefly. I'm the one that loves to be at the front, and he would enjoy that. He would enjoy having me out there at the front, doing me stuff. So the first gig we did was 3,000 people at the World Bowie Convention. That was our first gig at the Hammersmith Cunard Hotel. It was jammed solid with Bowie fans. It was like a science fiction convention of American proportions, but for Bowie. And we were obviously on with a few other bands, and I never signed any more autographs than I've done on that day. I think I spent an hour signing autographs, and nobody even knew who we were, because we just happened to be playing at this Bowie thing, you know, and I had the hat and the suit and the cheekbones, and so there you go. Only the internet will find you out. I mean, and that is what happened if we fast forward to 2005, because Martin and I finished in 1984, recording together and playing together. He didn't want to go forward with it because he was a bit wary about the fame thing, and he didn't want to go off and get recording deals. Fast forward to 2005, I've become established as a defence and counter-terrorism expert, particularly in the field of nuclear, biological, chemical weapons and explosives. And I've been kind of working for all sorts of people as an independent, including Jane's. And Jane's is the biggest military publisher in the world. And one day, because I used to work with the press office, because I used to go on television a lot to be interviewed, breaking news, a bomb's gone off somewhere, or something's happened. So I used to be on TV quite a lot and on the radio, etc. As the expert soundbite thing. And one day they rang me and they said, "We're getting a lot of emails about you. Were you some sort of pop star?" And the internet's already quite well established by then, and I never bothered to even look myself up on the internet at that time. I had no idea. And they said that they'd been getting emails from people who were trying to find Oppenheimer Analysis tapes, and this cassette called New Mexico that had been doing the rounds through a few DJs in Europe, and somebody had either copied it or something, I don't know. Somehow or other, people were trying to find out if it still existed, or if they could get the tape, or if the band was still there. So I was amazed, because I had forgotten clean about it. And so then I started getting these emails, and particularly from a lady in New York called Veronica, who was very interested in actually releasing some of this material from the past. And so I got in touch with Martin, and we decided to do some more work together. And so we did, and we produced a CD of about 7 or 8 songs. Veronica released an EP on vinyl of 4 of the songs from before, which were Devil's Dancers, Cold War, Radiance, and Men in White Coats. And it's now in its 4:3 print, and I think there were some other things released as well, which are on tape and things like that. And we did some gigs. We did gigs like Brave Exhibitions in London and in Berlin. We did several gigs in London. We did one in Brighton at the Comedia. We played in Belgium for Leven de Ridder, and in Germany in Bochum at the Neonwelt Club, Zwischenfall, as it then was, which was on the invitation of Plastic Man Michael Wehmeyer. By then, there was an electronic coterie of people who were following everything on the internet and so on, and all these kind of internet magazines and DJs and radio programs like Veronica did. And so we'd get played on all of that, and we ended up with Devil's Dancers being played on absolutely everything, in every club in Germany. We've just been ejected from the Roundhouse because they're now setting up shop for tonight's gig. The music that we did in 2005 was, I think, more sophisticated than the earlier material, and we would use it for the live shows that we were invited to do, but again we did not release it on any particular label or as a vinyl or CD. And time went by, and we kind of stopped working together as the years approached the present day. And there was some requests for a CD to be done, and Martin kind of, I'm not quite sure whether he wanted to do it or not, but we lost touch. So it didn't happen, and so the material which is available for Oppenheimer Analysis is the original vinyl. There were 1 or 2 more. We got lots of requests to play live, but Martin got sick, and he wasn't able to do as much. He was able to go and watch a gig, but not to actually do a gig. So I started working with some of the people at the same time, around about 2009, 2010. I met up with Mahk Rumbae, who'd been in Sudeten Creche, and we decided to start writing songs together. And so we've now formed a band called Touching the Void, and we're working on our first album, and we've released a single called Parallel Lives. 2011 going into 2012, I made contact with a guy in Vienna who wanted to release some music of mine, and he was quite interested in me doing some new work. We released an album called The Presence of the Abnormal, and the name of the band is Oppenheimer Mk II. Mahk and Oppenheimer. The Oppenheimer Mk II music, although it has 80s influences with synthesizer sounds and rhythms, and it's danceable, it's very, very catchy, the songs are really, really very kind of commercial sounding. It's Mark's first venture into doing pop songs, because he has played with Konstruktivists, and he still does, and he's doing other projects with other people which are darker than the kind of music we're doing. But the difference between The Presence of the Abnormal and anything I've done before is the themes. I've got a very strong theme in the album, which is kind of a mixture of unrequited love, hero worship, and stepping into the shoes of my heroes. So there's a modern theme to it. In the 80s, I was writing about the things going on at the time, like a song called Cold War. Right, you know, that does what it says on the tin. This is 1982, we wrote a song called Cold War. Now I've written an album with Mark, The Presence of the Abnormal. It's actually a phrase which I and my colleagues use to describe, in military terms, something which is out of the ordinary, which could be a bomb, or it could be the signs that there is, a threat out there which has to be dealt with. So the term kind of got grafted in my mind as a really good title for an album. The day job could well be creeping into the night job, but I'm trying very hard, on the advice of both of my music collaborators, to make sure that the lyrics are not too literal and that people can identify with them for themselves, because that is really the role of the singer, that the singer is really got to be a vehicle for other people's emotions, that I mustn't impose my emotions and my experiences too much on others. I'm also working with Mickey Clark in Newcastle. We're called Major Impact, and we've done some very high techno style electro songs, some of which have been remixed by Clive Pierce, which are film soundtrack in their sort of mood and in their feel and in the level of professionalism that they have. Well, recently and very shockingly, Martin very sadly died a few days ago. We're now in early May in 2013, and I found out that he had been ill for a while. I knew that he'd been ill with quite a rare ailment, and I didn't expect to actually hear the news when I did. I thought that maybe he would have an operation which would help things for a little while, but sadly that didn't happen. So really we are obviously want to dedicate as much to him as we can. It wasn't just shocking to hear about Martin dying. For me, it's the end of an era, because we'd known each other for a very long time, on and off. There was a 20-year break when we didn't see each other, but obviously all the inspiration to start doing music had come from him, for me to become a singer and a songwriter. So without him, I would never have embarked on any of this. I still wouldn't be doing it now, and I was born in 1953, so go figure. That's quite a long association, and one that was very great, and one that will be very sadly missed.